And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you're receiving this information. My name is Rafael Vasquez Guzman, and this is your show, Líderes del Futuro. And today, once again, we have Brandon Luna Rodriguez, who's back and visiting with us. One of the conversations that we want to focus on is budgeting with intention, as I like to call it. And so, Brandon, welcome back to the show. It's nice to see you again.
Thank you, Ralph, for having me on the show once again.
Definitely. One of the things that we wanted to talk about is, at least from my perspective, one of my frustrations to a certain degree, not just with the youth of today, but with people my age, is that we have zero in our bank accounts as savings or savings for investments, zero for emergency funds or any of that stuff. And yet we are spending thousands of dollars in new vehicles, in vacations, in everything else, as if tomorrow nothing is going to change. And I was watching one recent interview, um, and they were saying that in 2021 and even part of 2022, people were spending a lot of money buying vehicles, Rolex watches, and a lot of other things. And now you see them trying to sell them because now they are in debt by thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars, because they assumed that the federal government, at least in the United States, was going to continue to send out checks. And obviously, they didn't plan correctly. So tell us from your perspective, why should people have money set aside?
Well, from my perspective, we should have money set aside for, emergencies such as medical emergencies, car emergencies, like maintenance, how would I put this in words? Like immediate maintenance when a problem arises out of the blue, you get into an accident. And also if you ever do get laid off from your sole income, because then if you don't have anything to fall back on, you're forced to take on debt. But at the same time, how are you supposed to pay that debt if you don't have anything coming in?
Yeah, like how long is it going to take you to get a job? But in the meantime, everything is going most likely on a credit card with high interest of about 19, 20, 25, depending on the credit card. Um, how much, from your perspective, I know that when I do my trainings on finances, which are also available on my YouTube channel, I always say to people that they should have about 6 months in their emergency fund account. What do you suggest for that? And then we can talk about this other saving for investment idea that we were talking about.
Yeah, for sure. So 3 months is the minimum, but 6 months is recommended. Even if you could do a year, that's also good. But at the same time, I think 6 months is, good enough because you don't want to get to a point where you're just saving, saving, saving for emergencies, and then you have an excess amount that you probably don't touch at all, unless, let's say, an economic downturn happened and it does take someone more than 6 months to land another income generating job. And then, yeah, that's a bit of an outlier. Yeah.
Yeah, and to a certain degree, when you're talking about somebody losing their job, I mean, this happened with Amazon and Facebook and all of these other companies that suddenly let go of people. And it wasn't just people who were programming their systems and everything else, but even delivery drivers, because when we were in the middle of the pandemic, people were sitting at home just ordering everything. So they needed more drivers, and now they don't need as many drivers. So those are, again, examples, and there's plenty of other examples. But now the other piece that you and I were talking about, and we wanted to talk about today, has to do with saving to invest. Can you give us an example of what you're talking about when you talk about this idea of saving to invest?
Yeah, so people have different risk tolerances. Some people, are fine with going zero to the bank account because they know money's still coming in. Some people, before they take on any type of opportunity or risk, they got to make sure they have a safety net, to feel comfortable themselves in case anything goes wrong. But besides, whichever route you take, high risk, low risk, you always want to be saving capital, not just to save, but whenever an opportunity arises, like let's say, oh, you find these properties in a bundle in the East, or someone comes up to you with, oh, I need money so I can propel this business and I'll give you a percentage of equity or the revenue. And then you don't want to be like, oh, I wish I could do this, but I don't have the money right now. Because
Yeah.
then, you're never going to be ready for the opportunity, especially if spending habits are not in place and you end up not saving any money every month. So it's encouraged to, stack up capital as much as you can every month and stay liquid so you can pursue, even if it's the smallest opportunity, if it
Mhm.
generates you an extra $1,000, $5,000 a month, it could compound and you could start increasing your income little by little.
Yeah, and what better way than for somebody else to be paying the bills, right? So you get a property, you rent it to somebody, and then they are taking care of all of the bills, and then you're just sitting back, relaxing. You have a new ownership that you can use over time, the value of that property to get another loan, the equity. And again, one of the things that you're talking about is going to other places like in the East Coast, for example, or somebody reached out to me recently, and a lot of the time, for those of us who are in California, we think that this is it, right? That we shouldn't be looking outside of California, mainly because we don't know that there are other opportunities. Somebody reached out to me and they were sharing about a property that is available for what the property is worth in California, in this other state, in this other city, the prices are starting to go up. But at this moment, for that same property in California that is almost $600,000, over there it's only $150,000. And so if you have some of this money just set aside to do the down payment, and then again, if you can set it, buy it, rent it, somebody else will be making the payments every month for you. But if you don't have any money, then what are you gonna do?
Yeah, true. Like, um, it's interesting when people say that you need a large chunk of capital to kickstart any business. Even with $5,000 to $10,000, you could, look at starting Airbnbs. You can look at doing Amazon FBA, which is basically there's many routes to this. You can, pick a product based on information, statistics, and stuff, and then after that, order a test sample. But before you do that, you want to study the product, like since it will most likely already be existing out there. See what the top people that are selling it, what the reviews are like are based on, like how do I word this? Like check what the negative reviews of that product that is currently being sold by a high competitor is, and then with your supplier, you would just coordinate together to fix those problems to make your product stand out. Then with like $7,000 or so, you can order the test samples, do marketing for the product by getting people to take photos and such of it, listing it on there. And then when you see it start taking off, and people are actually liking the product, like actually purchasing a certain amount, then you have money to order more units, and then you could, generate sales and have a profit margin of anywhere from 30 to 40-ish% and generate something new with as low as $7,000 to start up that thing. But there is a lot of small details in that it's best to find a mentor to start that. And then with $5,000 to $10,000, as I said before, you could also start mobile services like detailing. You could get a detailing van, or you could use your existing car and then buy the product.
Mhm.
I even saw that you could start a painting business for as low as like $4,000 or $5,000 as well. And you can even start landscaping, anything trailer related, cleaning related. You could find someone that does the cleaning job for cheap and charge a higher rate so you make profit out of it. There's many things you could do with that amount. So it's like
Yeah.
people underestimate um, what you can do with 5 to 10,000, especially real estate. Most people, when they think about real estate, they think about the textbook approach to it, like, oh no, I need 20% of 100,000 or 20% of 500,000. But what I don't see is like, let's say you're looking at a property, whether it be in California or in the East. If the property's been sitting on the market for more than 60 to 100 days, you can probably negotiate with the seller since they're probably desperate to sell the
Mhm.
property to seller finance it to you with, negotiable terms like you don't have to do 20%. You could probably negotiate them down to 10% or less. And then just, give them a good interest rate that doesn't eat into your cash flow. But you
Mhm.
also have to do your due diligence of doing comps and what's it called, calculations on how much after expenses are you cash flowing per door. And then it's like my plan at the moment. You either do seller financing or 20% down conventional if you have the means of income, and then partner up with people and buy a bulk of properties a year, scale them. After 5 years, buy them out by cash out refinancing. And then who knows if you build a good network in real estate and good relationships, you could have 1,000 units within 10 years.
And that's again, one of the things is this last example is again, some people think about it and they're like, no, 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 that's too risky. And before that, you also mentioned so many pieces. When you talk about real estate, one is again the buying of the property itself, but within that, again, if you're buying something, you may need somebody to paint the whole thing. You may need a carpenter. You may need a roofer. You may need somebody to do the landscaping. And one of the things that I know, again, is that people can come together and they can support each other. If somebody knows the landscaping, right, eventually that becomes the landscaper for those 1,000 units that you're talking about. But people need to take risks that are healthy. And then when you say, well, it's only seven to $10,000, some people are like, I don't have that money. Well, again, we talked about this before, where people are spending $10 every day at Starbucks. And if they think about it and they cut down on that and they cut down on a couple other wasteful spending that they're doing, they can build up to those seven to $10,000. We're not saying you should have it today and go and invest it. But as you are saving that money, you are looking at opportunities, just like you said, right? Like it doesn't have to be in California, it could be somewhere else. And if you are too concerned about who's going to watch over those properties, again, there are management companies that will keep a percentage to run your business somewhere else. And you look at the reviews of the company, you negotiate, you do contracts, and as a result of that, you can sit back in California, but your investment is making you money in another state.
Yeah. And to piggyback on that, especially if you're doing like a niche type of real estate, like for example, affordable housing, Section 8.
Mhm.
Let's say after a certain amount of units, if you can afford to pay a in-house manager $4,000 a month, that would be the best thing you could probably do because their only priority is to be running your business. They're gonna be easy to get in contact with, especially if you find someone that's new to property management. You could train them like with your processes and systems, especially like if it's in a niche market. And they can also, be doing monthly inspections. They can also be looking for properties for you on the side if you don't want to spend time doing that. Like you give them a criteria and they can just, spend their day doing that because at the end of the day, they're making forward $3,000 a month.
Yeah. Yeah. And in some situations, what you do is you negotiate where, right, if you once you have plenty of units, that person can live in the property rent free. And that's part of the trade off, right? So maybe you're not paying them as much money, but they're getting the rent for free. And as a result of that, you have somebody who is on call for any type of emergencies. And because they live in the property, people are less likely to again do graffiti or destroy the property. Uh, One of my colleagues years and years ago, she actually invested in elderly apartments, and so she had, I think, 100 unit apartment. And when I asked her why, she said, when you have families living in these apartments, kids are running around, they're jumping on things, they are, and it increases the cost on replacing items, painting, and everything else. When you have elderly, as long as you're following all the rules of making it accessible and everything else, they don't want to be running around. They are not destroying property. They just want a peaceful, quiet space where to live. And so, again, as you said, it's about focusing on a group of people or in areas, whether it is Section 8, whether it is whatever the situation may be. And as a result of that, that becomes your specialty. And over time, again, it's about getting multiple locations where you have 20 units, 100 units, whatever the situation is. But whomever now has 150 units started likely with one, unless they were really wealthy and they could afford this, right? So people can still jump into this market, just like people can jump into, again, doing the maintenance at one apartment complex, and eventually they become the contractor that takes care of 1,000 units in different locations. Again, people need to always have that belief in themselves that they are capable of doing this. And often it does require cash to start these businesses. Therefore, that's why you need to save. The intention here is opportunities will show up, but regret will also be there. If you say, oh, I wish that, why didn't I, right, have the money there? And a lot of the time we're living moment to moment without planning for the future. And so, again, one of the things that we talked previously was about cutting down on those unnecessary expenses that people are spending all the time in. So again, having that emergency fund, but then again, saving with the intention of investing. So you're thinking 7 to 10,000 is a good place to start?
Yeah, especially for, all those businesses I listed before, and especially for Section 8, there's a certain blueprint on, getting those properties for low down and being able to get them for as low as 10K total costs, which is closing costs, down payment, and renovation. So basically the burst strategy. But yeah, I would say for people to learn that they either have to do their own due diligence or find a mentor that has done that before, because there's a lot of details that is just not publicly like available right there unless you search deeply enough. Because no one's gonna tell you like school or anyone's not gonna tell you, oh, you can sell and finance this, you can get creative with financing. They don't tell you any of that.
Mhm.
But with the other businesses, yeah, you can also start with $7,000 to $10,000. It's like I just feel like for people that are living at home, like students or young adults, and maybe they pay a little bit of rent or maybe don't pay any rent at all. It's like they shouldn't have an excuse for not being able to afford a good amount of money unless they have all these unnecessary expenses every month. Because if you're making 2,500 or 3,000, you're living off of 500 to
Mhm.
$1,000 a month. You can stack up 1,500 every month, and in 2 to 5 months, you can have close to that $7,000 to $10,000, and you could get jump started on your stuff. So there's really no excuse right there.
Yeah, and again, in dealing with or working with people who are younger and don't get this type of information in their high school, junior high school, or at home, a lot of these kids are the ones that now that they are jumping into college, the first thing they do is they go and buy that $50,000 truck or car that instead of saving this money and driving an old bucket for a while, and just being able to make it to, right, whether you have a brand new car or whether you have an older vehicle that works, is still going to take you to the same location. But a lot of people now are committed to this 7 year car payment that on average in the United States, the reports tell us is $1,000. And if you're a young driver, your insurance is going to go through the roof for the first 3 years. Why put yourself in that situation when you could be saving that money and investing it, as you said, either to start businesses or invest in properties? And again, taking the time to look at other locations outside California. It sounds like you yourself are looking at the possibility of investing in this type of housing, Section 8 housing, maybe. Um, and again, you are looking outside California.
Yeah, looking at the East, looking at Ohio, Missouri, Michigan. They have some pretty good stuff there. Have a certain criteria, as in like no flood zones, no violent crimes within the immediate vicinity of the address. Um, Having a certain square footage, the smaller the house, the better. Because when if the unit ever gets turned over, then you have less stuff to worry about in
Yeah.
comparison to like a big house and stuff. And especially like you also want to. There's many factors to this. You want to make sure the garage, like if you don't want people hoarding stuff in there or whatever, close off the garage, don't have it accessible. Um, you also want to limit the amount of amenities you give people, because unless they're willing to pay a fee monthly to use, let's say washer, dryers, etc., it's not really worth being like, oh, they broke the washer or dryer, they broke this and that, then not more money comes out of your pocket, which eats into your cash flow. You want to give them the bare minimum necessities, which is a fridge, a microwave, a stove, and for Section 8, a dishwasher is not necessary. Um, but a sink and all that stuff is. You also want to, like you get creative with AC units. You don't necessarily have to have an AC unit throughout the house. You could have like those window units or
Mm.
some things called mini splits and all that stuff as well. And where some people that I've talked to failed in Section 8 is they don't got processes and straight. They buy properties without doing their due diligence, because Section 8 can disqualify because the house says, oh, it's 3 bedrooms or something. Section 8 can disqualify something being a bedroom if it doesn't meet the what's it called, the sizing requirement. So some people, don't do their due diligence on that, close on a property, then they're like, oh, I'm getting less than what I thought I was getting because they don't qualify this as a room. Because Section 8 has these vouchers. It's like, oh, you have a 2 bedroom voucher, you get this amount of rent. You have 3 bedroom voucher, blah, 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 you get this amount of rent. So that's another thing. Like, um, I don't know if many people are familiar with, but when you close, before you close on a property, you're able to put it under contract, as long as these contingencies are made.
Mhm.
So I believe you could put a property and have it under contract for 30 to 45 days while you make sure it, fulfills everything that it needs to fulfill. Like there is let's say your repair budget that you want to spend on repairs is 5K. You want to make sure it meets that. You want to make sure all the rooms qualify as rooms. You want to make sure it passes the HUD checklist, which is something that Section 8 follows to make sure a property passes as Section 8 approved. And yeah, before you even close on anything, you want to make sure that happens, because the last thing you want to do is close on a property like, like not doing all the inspections that are necessary, and then something comes up and then you have a negative bias towards real estate or this particular niche. Because I've read many cases where people have negative opinions about this niche, but what they fail to do is not have good systems and processes in place. Like they don't screen their tenants aggressively. They're like, oh, someone's Section 8, let them in. And then they end up destroying their property, and then they have negative biases towards that.
Yeah. Yeah, they just
Yeah.
assume that all of the Section 8 individuals are going to behave in the same manner, that they're not going to get paid or whatever the situation is. And again, I think one important piece that you mentioned earlier is, again, choose where you're going to focus. If you're going to focus on Section 8, focus on Section 8, stay in that lane and do that. If you're not going to do Section 8 and you're going to do something a little bit different, stay with that and make it work. Master the information ahead of time. As you said, either find a mentor, read enough, right? Some people think also that I just have the money, I'm just going to throw it out there and see what happens and we'll figure it out later on. You're like, again, learn about contracts, learn about processes, how quickly does this contract closes, the buyer, the seller, what negotiating rights do you have? All of those things are essential so that it's not just about having the money. The money is a key item, but beyond that, you really have to take the time and learn for months before you really get into this. And again, what may be okay in California may not be okay in South Dakota or may not be okay in Florida. And as a result of that, it's important for people to take the time and understand the area where you're working at, what are the rules and the regulations so that you don't get yourself in trouble. And that brings me to that question. For you, obviously, this is an area of interest. How much time have you been working on this, learning, talking to people maybe before you actually make the move?
So, with work and everything else that's going on, like side ventures and stuff, um, I would say I've been actively learning about all these things, Section 8 related, for about 4 months now, 5 months now. Yeah, like I read up on how to calculate how much properties will potentially cash flow based on these expenses, what markets are good, what criteria I need to follow. Also studying up on terminology because you don't want to approach an investor like asking them for money and stuff, and then you don't know what some of the stuff means because then the trust goes from
Mhm.
here to down there because they're like, you
Yeah.
don't know what you're doing at all.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No. And all of that, again, it's just like when you go to school and there's going to be a test in the midterm or the final. And if you haven't invested the energy reading the material, analyzing information, how are you going to do well on this thing? Right. So it's the same thing. If it's a business and you want to be taken serious, then you have to do your work. And some people, again, they think it's all about the money, but there is more to this for sure. And so it sounds again like you've been working on this for a few months and you're getting ready, looking at things, analyzing data in order to determine what is the best location. And again, how much is it going to require for you to get started? And at what point do you go to, again, other investors to be able to say, listen, I have enough for this percentage. Can you bring this much? And then in the future, as you said, everybody makes money. You buy them out, hopefully, and then you have enough equity now to be able to go and buy the next property. And this is how many individuals have done it, whether there's apartments, homes, or other businesses. And so again, I really like that you've been taking the time to be able to get to know this information. And I also appreciate that you're willing to share the work that you're doing so that other people get interested in this. And the key item here is again saving, because a lot of people, again, it seems like that money in their pocket or in their bank account, it's coming in and 5 minutes later it's gone. And so again, what I found in the last, I would say, 6 months to a year, a lot of people lost their jobs and they had zero money to keep up with credit card payments or down payments on what is called on a house or even to rent an apartment. And it's important that we save money. And so, again, you said minimum 3 months. I always suggest people 6 months just to be safe so that you don't have to be stressed out about how quickly you need to get a job and then you end up with something that you don't want. But that's just should be a requirement for everybody. But then we're talking about investment type of money. In your situation where you're talking about maybe investing in property, let's say an apartment complex or a duplex to get started, how much money do you recommend for people to have saved for that?
So if we're talking about apartments, duplexes, all that stuff, it really varies. Because with Section 8 and single family housing, you have more of like leverage because it's like, oh, they're single family homes. They're sometimes in distress. And you can negotiate there. For duplexes, you could probably have the same amount of like leverage. Like you find distressed duplexes that you can negotiate the terms on, but I believe duplexes and such are a bit higher price, especially like in the East in comparison to single family homes. And on like for complexes, I've yet to hear about a complex being distressed. So I would assume that you need a bit more than $100,000. Like I'm not needing a bit more than $100,000, but the complex will definitely be more than $100,000. So you do need a good chunk of change for 20%, because unless you have some type of leverage there, where you can find a motivated seller that's willing to seller finance you that, then yeah, you'll need a bigger chunk of change for that. Yes, so I had a point I wanted to bring up. So single family homes, I recommend single family homes because when it's time to sell, they're easy to sell. And on top of that, like I said before, you have grounds to negotiate if it's distressed since it's a single family home. And like in comparison to multi-unit stuff like complexes, I'm pretty sure if the complex has amenities and stuff like that, you have to go through a bunch of regulations and stuff before you can even sell things. And it could take way longer than just, waking up one day being like, I want to sell a single family home, and it's gone within like, a week or so to 30 days. So unless you're really into apartment complexes or want to diversify your portfolio later on after you niched into something, then go for it. But at the moment, yeah, complexes are like the last thing, because I'm like, if I want to liquidate and sell things, I don't want to go through a bunch of processes before I'm even able to sell it.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, if you're going to eventually start with a complex, that's where you go to investors and you say, I have 200,000 from this previous investment, but can you commit to bring in this much money to the conversation? Definitely. So again, it's important that people understand that it is possible to start businesses. This country, for the most part, is run right by the contributions in taxes and everything else from small businesses in the United States, and people shouldn't just assume that there is no possibilities. There is a possibility for you to start a small business that can develop into something else. And again, real estate is one of those. You can start a business of washing vehicles, saving this money, building your wealth from there in order to be able to invest in other areas. And so I like the fact that, again, you make the time, you come over, you tell us about your ideas, what you're looking at, and try to motivate or the community so that they also can start looking at the possibility, right? Stop going into debt if you can afford it. So again, buy a 6 to 8 year old car that's still manageable, that is not going to cost you a lot of money to keep it running. Avoid buying the brand new car that you're going to go in debt. And by the time you finish paying it, you're going to have zero money to get started with another vehicle because it's just a debt trap. Um, and again, start saving for investing. Make sure you have your money put away for emergencies. Don't assume that the emergency money is the investment money. One account is separate from the other account. So I like the way that you presented it to me, which is saving for investing, because that's the idea in this situation. And again, I hope that you can come back in the next, I would say, couple of weeks, few weeks, and we can continue this conversation about where you are now as far as looking into that, and what other ideas for people to be able to start investing, creating businesses, and creating long-term wealth. Generational wealth is really the way to go here.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Looking to also be back on the show, like in due time. Could be weeks, anytime. Because like one thing I also want to add on to this is like, yeah, like in the beginning, start off with a car that gets you from point A to B until you can meet like what I call the 10% rule, which is like whatever you take home monthly, you don't want to spend more than 10% on on a vehicle when it's insurance and the payment. For example, if you want to get a car that has $1,000 payment and the insurance, depending on your age, is like $300 or something.
Hmm.
That's 1,300 a month. You want to make sure you're at least making 13,000 a month, so you're utilizing only 10% of your income on that. I mean, as you scale your income, what would be 10% is now 5% or something.
Hmm.
And one thing that I would say is look at cars that hold their value relatively well, because I'm an advocate for financing over buying in cash, because when you finance, you only put a certain amount down that they either require you to or that you can afford, and then you have the rest of liquid capital to put into other stuff that gives you returns. And then let's say when you want to get on the car, if you choose a car that holds its value well after let's say like 1 or 2 years, you could sell it back to the dealership. Like whenever you want to get rid of it, they pay the remaining amount because you're either break even or positive, and you could own a $80,000 car for like 20 grand or less within that time period that you're financing it. And also, there's gap insurance and stuff. Let's say you finance the car, you get into an accident, you also don't aren't really responsible for it because gap insurance just pays the remaining amount, just the loan. So there's like many ways to be able to drive a cool car but not lose your butt on it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, and again, that the other piece with that one is just the interest, right? Like I work with this young man, and I mentioned it, I think, in a previous episode. I work with this young man who wanted to look cool, bought a used car, and was paying 21% interest every month. So out of $645 or so a month, only about $27 were going towards the principal to pay off the car. The rest of the money was just all interest, right? So there's a difference between that and something that is not existing right now, but was a year ago, which was low interest of 2.78, 2.85, 3.0 interest. Right now, interests are at a minimal, typically at about 7%. And if you're a young individual who this is your first car, again, they'll eat you alive by charging you 15, 18, 21, 25%. And if you don't understand anything about finances, you'll be like, oh, it's no big deal. And it is a big deal because you're just giving your paycheck away. And so, again, reliable vehicles that last you a long time, Toyota, Honda. And again, don't buy the latest one. Buy one from 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago. Do the maintenance on it. It'll last you a long time while you are again creating your business. Once you have a business, you can buy a better car that you buy it through your company for your business because most of the traveling that you're going to do is likely going to be related to your business. So the mileage and everything else is tax deductible, right? But again, we're happy to educate the community, but the community also needs to raise their hand and say, this is what I'm interested in learning about. So again, you can reach out to us, lideresdelfuturo@yahoo.com, and you can say, hey, can you bring Brandon back and can you educate us on other things like day trading? Brandon has knowledge about that. We also have some knowledge on the stock market in general. We can talk about a lot of other things. So if you're listening to this on our podcast, if you're watching this on our YouTube channel, again, lideresdelfuturo@yahoo.com, you can tell us what you're interested on learning. And with that, I want to thank you for being here today once again, Brandon, and I look forward to our next conversation.
Yeah. Thank you for having me.